Hello, City of Canby. Thank you for joining us for the Monday, August 28th Canby Planning Commission meeting. We'll get started with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And first up is a consent item. We are going to be addressing the final findings for the Economic Opportunity Analysis CPA 23-02. Do we have a motion?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we accept the final findings of CPA 23-02 as submitted.
And do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Very well, we'll go to a roll call vote, starting to my left with Commissioner Driscoll.
Aye.
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 Aye. The ayes have it. It is approved by a vote of 5-0. Moving on to citizen input on non-agenda items. This is an opportunity for members of the public to address the Planning Commission on non-agenda items. Each person will be given 3 minutes to speak. Staff and Planning Commission will make every effort to respond to questions raised during citizens' input before the meeting ends or as quickly as possible thereafter. You may speak on non-agenda items via Zoom. Do we have any citizen input via Zoom?
No.
Seeing none or none in person, we'll move right on to new business. There is none, so we'll move right on to public hearings, which there is none. So then we will move on to our Planning Commission work session. The purpose of tonight's work session is to give the Planning Commission the opportunity to discuss the comprehensive plan update. To make the most of the short time we're given for these work sessions, public comment will not be taken. Instead, we invite public comment at all of the Planning Commission's regular meetings under either of the two opportunities dedicated on each agenda for public comment. In addition, we invite the public to contact city staff with comments or concerns. Although this is a public meeting, the Planning Commission cannot make any formal decision in a work session. Next step actions are often determined for deliberation and discussion at a properly noticed Planning Commission hearing. And with that, we're going to turn it over to Planning Director Hardy to talk about the comprehensive plan update.
Thank you, Chair Ellison and Commissioners. Good evening. Tonight, we're going to cover some information that you previously have heard about, but also with some additional information. I'm going to try to keep it pretty high level, even though some of these slides have quite a bit of information on them. The focus is really trying to help the Planning Commission understand as we continue to move forward into the comprehensive plan, the steps involved with that process, to understand those a little better. There's a lot of steps, and the City Council will also be getting a detailed explanation of the comprehensive plan process on November 1. This is kind of a preview of perhaps some of the same information, but there probably will receive other information such as public comments that have been received through the visioning process to date, et cetera, which we're not going to cover tonight. So with that, we have talked about sequential urban growth boundary process and kind of the work program that's involved with that. We're going to cover that briefly tonight, along with some of the previous information about the benefits to that. More specifically, I felt like tonight, the value tonight would be talking about the context, because there's many pieces that kind of overlap here, about the broader schedule for the urban growth boundary expansion and what that all entails. So we did talk about the sequential urban growth boundary process previously, and some of this is a repeat, like I said, from other slides that we've seen previously, but essentially the city qualifies for that process, and it does provide a means for us to have a work plan and also provide some protections on appeals as we go through the process. And just kind of to go back through this, the focus really is on the acreage of a demand for 20-year forecast for both employment as well as residential. And And we'll go into the detail a little bit further, but the housing needs analysis is indicating about 50 acres of additional residential land beyond the current urban boundary of the city and about 447 acres of employment land. These are based on buildable lands reviews that have been done, and those have been vetted through the Department of Land Conservation and Development. So the sequential process, again, it's really the forecast here is to lock in the 2020 Portland State University forecast without having to repeat our housing needs analysis and our economic opportunities analysis, which would be costly and time consuming if we had to repeat those processes. The other item is just the protection that sequential review process provides, which is on the level where we're not having to include the housing needs and economic opportunity analysis as part of our urban growth boundary initiation process. And those are all bundled into the sequential review process, which provides for a limited appeal. So again, what this does also provide is the county's support for this and the Department of Land Conservation support. The county is involved as they are needing to authorize the sequential urban growth boundary process, as well as ultimately the urban growth boundary, whatever that finally is, they'll have to adopt that, the Board of County Commissioners, for that to be active. It's part of the structure of government that county has that land. It's in their control until it's brought into the urban growth boundary. And the sequential review process is valid for 5 years, so I don't really see us in any case taking 5 years to do this. I hope we don't take 5 years to do this. That's a long time, but it feels like it's a very adequate amount of time. And again, it provides a work plan and predictability for how we go through this process for the urban growth boundary expansion. City Molalla has gone through this process. It's been beneficial to them. They have some similar issues to the City of Canby. So this slide, I know there's a lot of text on here, and we're going to go through this a little bit more in detail, but the takeaways on this I want us to look at, because they'll be focused on a little bit further, is a comprehensive plan and transportation system plan processes. We're hoping to have adoption of those by January 1, 2025. There'll be a urban growth boundary expansion that would go beyond that, into probably summer 2025. And that urban growth boundary process is really a more programmatic process that doesn't get into the details that I believe we will also need to go into, which is called conceptual plan review process, but it would establish the boundary. And so we'll go into some of the details of those. The distinction really is that there's a process that's necessary to go through the urban growth boundary process, which talks about land need and looking at high-level public utilities and services, compatibility with adjacent farm and forest uses. Those are kind of more high-level items. There's less on issues like cost of infrastructure, and that very detailed analysis is not really part of that. Also, not part of that would be the need to do a wetland inventory, which is part of the conceptual plan process that would go beyond the establishment of the urban growth boundary, which is more, the conceptual process is really, for the sake of argument, is really more of an implementation process to the adopted urban growth boundary, if that makes sense. So the council adopted a resolution for the sequential urban growth boundary on August 16th, and that is now in the hands of Clackamas County. The county Board of County Commissioners will be coming back to work. They took some time off. They take time off in August, but they will be back in action in September. And there will be a hearing where county staff will present this, and we'll be there as well as city staff as for the sequential process. Since they've gone through it in Molalla already, we're not expecting a lot of surprises here. It's really adopting the process. It's for the county allowing that to be moved forward. And then the Department of Land Conservation and Development would need to also approve this, but they were the ones that recommended the process to begin with, so we're not anticipating any issues there. So this slide is going to kind of go through quickly a few items, and I wanted to highlight a few of these. So the economic opportunities analysis, which you just approved the findings tonight, that's going to go to the City Council on September 6th for their review and adoption. The housing needs analysis, we're anticipating that to come back to the Planning Commission before the end of the year. And to Commissioner Driscoll's point about the need to revisit housing affordability and mortgage rates, I'm anticipating we're going to have some work sessions on those before we get to hearing. So that will come back, and that's not been forgotten. But just to let you know, that's something that will come back and be looked at in more detail. I don't have dates on those, but following this Planning Commission work session, I'm going to be working with the consultants to define what those are. This year's rapidly going by. It's kind of crazy. We're going into September, and suddenly there aren't that many even hearings left in the year. So I'm starting to recognize that, and so we're going to have to start really scheduling things out a little more specifically. And the housing efficiency measure is another part for that, which again, the Planning Commission is playing a large role in that. We are sending the consultants the approved contract for that this week. So you'll be seeing that come back as well. Housing efficiency are needed to be adopted to allow for an urban growth boundary expansion. It's the state's requirement to have the cities look at efficiency measures, which is basically saying how is land being used efficiently to the maximum extent possible for housings to limit the need for an urban growth boundary expansion. And even with the housing efficiency measures, we're still anticipating the need for an urban growth boundary expansion for housing. And the transportation system plan, again, will be part of, we're anticipating the transportation system plan and the comprehensive plan to be adopted together. There's a possibility that the transportation system may end up being adopted sooner than the comp plan, but those are still kind of being determined. But again, the target date is for both those would be for the comprehensive plan and transportation system plan this end of December 2024. And as I mentioned in the other slide, the urban growth boundary expansion would happen after the comprehensive plan adoption, and that would go into the first quarter of 2025 with anticipation of approval second to third quarter of 2025. Essentially from the adoption of the comp plan, it's about 120 days, which would mean we would anticipate hopefully no appeals, and that would clear the urban growth boundary process.
If there was an appeal, who would that be coming from?
It would be, it could be from, I'm doubting it would come from the state because we're working with them, but if another party, let's say a conservation group filed an appeal, that would be something that we have not factored into this. And again, I feel like because of the Department of Land Conservation and Development's close they're working closely with us on housing needs and employment, economic opportunities analysis, and the rest of the process, and encouraging us to apply for grants, which looks favorable for the urban growth boundary expansion. I feel very comfortable saying that they're coming alongside us, and we'll know if there's an issue going through that process before we'd ever get to that point. So, but a conservation group could come in and say, no, we were in disagreement with that.
Thank you.
So the next slide here, there's this is quite a bit of text here, and I kind of wanted us to boil this down. This is the urban growth boundary expansion process. Again, kind of the framework, programmatic framework about what's needed to address the process in the state for an urban growth boundary expansion, which he talks about efficient accommodation of land need, orderly and economic provision of public facilities and services, comparative environmental, energy, economic, and social consequences, and compatibility of proposed use with nearby farm and forest activities. So this process, just for understanding some context about when this would happen, we're going through a visioning process right now, which will take us from August through the end of this year. And And the process of 1 to 4 really is more in the scenario planning process, which is from February 2024 to May 2024. Out of that process, we'll start to see, and I'm kind of skipping ahead here. I'm just going to go to the next slide. An area, an urban growth boundary area, and that would be again from February to May 2024, that boundary will start to be defined. So just giving you some parameters around this. And there's, we touched on some of the other items. The county would need to be involved with the urban growth boundary expansion piece that we're addressing as well. So I just wanted to give you these kind of broad frameworks. So between now and the end of the year, we're doing visioning. Scenario planning will be next year, really starting in February, running through May. And that's really one that where we're getting into the boundary, kind of the preliminary boundary is being established, and then a final boundary being established. I did want to circle back on one item that we've discussed in previous Planning Commission meetings, and Commissioner Llewellyn, just for purposes of making sure it's very clear to those that would be outside of the city limits that are in the potential urban growth boundary expansion area, they will be receiving a letter near term. This, in the next probably several weeks, that will identify that that's being considered. Again, we're in the visioning process this year, so we're not even talking about, defining exactly where this is at. But just for also importance of, I think, discussion, is there will be a community open house summit for the comprehensive plan on September 14. That's the initial one. And then there will be a second one, which we just landed on a date today, November 14. And that November 14 will be an important discussion point. We'll have it'll be kind of a charrette format, meaning that there'll be table groups and a report out by table groups, but there'll be, for example, the anticipation is there'll be residential, how much residential is needed, and you'll have puzzle pieces, and we'll be talking about that, and also in employment. You'll have puzzle pieces in a map. So where do those go? And the idea behind that is that this would come up with some scenarios for where that might go, and that will not all fit in the city limits. So you either have to explain why you're not using all your puzzle pieces, or you have to use all your puzzle pieces. But the end result is all the puzzle pieces need to be used. So that's November 14. I'm jumping ahead here a little bit, but that's the first summit in September. Is going to be more what's existing conditions, what vision, what community input has been for visioning to date, kind of where we're going. November 14, we'll get into more of the detail. There'll be another summit, open house in February of 2024, and there'll be a final summit in May 2024. So there's a lot coming kind of down the path here. I just felt it was important to kind of at least frame this up. We'll get into some of the same detail with the City Council on November 1, but I just, to your point, Commissioner Llewellyn, we also 100% agree that those that would be affected, that where properties would be looked at for potentially being brought in, clearly important to have early messaging to those folks.
So basically you're saying you kind of know where that area is already. We just won't know until February.
Well, we know where it is in the sense it's undesignated, and so you cannot go into rural reserve. So we know it'll be some undesignated land, but we don't know that's to the extent that there's a map, that 2040 map that shows undesignated land, it'll be somewhere in that area. And so we'll not have any precision until next year in terms of where those are. So it's, again, we're trying to get input from from the community about where we're going in the future, but to your past points, we don't want people to be surprised, like, hey, we've planned this whole thing around your property, and, we clearly want this message to be like where people know about it in advance.
So do you, I would highly recommend, they did all that with us back in the day. A lot of us never got that letter, or if they did, I didn't know what they were talking about. I think some phone banking should be happening to those people that don't. Those people, if they know what's going on, they're going to be at these meetings. We want them at these meetings.
Yeah, and I think the outreach here, I think a letter is a minimal thing. I would say that we haven't quite figured that out, what that looks like, but for sure, every individual would be, that was considered to be part of that area would be identified, and we would send something to them. So we're trying to get the message out. That's it. But we aren't even at the mapping stage at this point. I'm just letting you know that straight up. So we're way early in the process, but it is coming. So next year is coming, and we'll start getting into more of the detail.
Can I request to review that letter before you send it out?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Did you say the first summit was September 14th?
September 14th, so it's at the police station, Camas Police Station. I'm kind of jumping ahead, so my planning director's report will probably be very minimal. So September 14, 6 p.m. At the city police station. They have a really nice community. I'm not sure if you've been to their community room before. It's quite nice. It's probably the nicest building in the city for events. It's relatively large, and that's why which is why we wanted it. Actually, the Willamette room's nice here too, but it's not as big. So that's all set up, followed by November 14, which will get into more of this kind of report out and what people's ideas are, more of a mapping exercise, preliminary mapping, but still talking about visioning. Then February 2024, starting to get into scenario planning, and then May 2024, we'll have some more lockdown on where we're going in the future, and obviously there'll be city council input on this as well. This is not going to be done in a vacuum, but there's other processes that will unfold as part of that.
Okay.
Don, there is the November 14th also at the police station?
Police station,
same
yeah,
location?
6 p.m. police station. That was just confirmed today.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And would you please remind us as we're getting closer to some of these so that we can make sure that, because I'd like to.
Yep.
make
No,
sure
we
that I
want you to
attend
be
here,
there.
but-
I would hope you all could attend these because you are very close to this.
Can you back up one slide?
Yep.
Number 9. So dropping down to bullet point number 3, where it talks about comparative environmental, energy, economic, and social consequences. I think that Canby we're kind of at a tipping point with some of our utilities, i.e. water. I think we're in the negative side. Power, I think we're getting close. Sewer, I'm not exactly sure where we're at with sewer as far as where we're expanding and how we get it. And the treatment plant is clear at the other end of town and so on and so forth. I guess my question is, bottom line is, where the stakeholders that are in all of that, the water, the electric, power, so on and so forth, sewer, how do they plug into this? I'd rather see them plugged in now rather than this is what we decided, now you need to play catch up.
And great points. There's been many conversations around this. Ironically, I'll take on Canby Public Utility as their first entity. They're updating and they're going to be adopting a water system master plan in September. We've been spending several months with them and discussing this and their consultants about the urban and growth boundary expansion and what that all entails. Probably at least 6 months of conversation with them. Their consultants are aware they're using the same population forecasts that we're using. And so there's been some syncing of that. Now, what that does look like, they're anticipating, as I understand, a new water treatment plant, and that's part of this expansion piece. Obviously the expense and those kinds of things about how those things get funded would need to be more teased out, I think, in terms of the process. But yes, the macro elements of like, do we have the capacity? And then sewer is the same thing with Public Works. We've been having a lot of conversations with them. More conversations need to happen. And some of this ultimately relates to some level urban growth boundary expansion, but probably even more specifically to concept planning, which comes after the urban growth boundary expansion, is how viable is this to actually do, like on a concept level you can provide, but more and more detail in the concept level. What are the funding mechanisms? How are those going to work? What's the public share? What's the private share? Those things need to get worked out. And so I think some of this is, you kind of form the basis of your boundary and your need, and then you go through an analysis piece of it, and the level of detail that we're going to have to articulate this further. I won't be able to get into the details tonight because we haven't quite got there, but those are great questions about, well, how refined is that at an urban growth boundary expansion level, and then how much more refined does it really need to be before we'll ever see anything annexed? It's a little bit complicated in that sense, and we're kind of working through that process, but we have to start with the need and look at those things. Like if it's a non-starter, like you're going into moratorium, which we are not, I mean, that would be like a point where like, why are we doing this, until we have some of those issues resolved. So fortunately, there's a water system master plan. They're considering that anticipated growth. Sewer is also, as I understand it, anticipating that growth. So, but those are really critical issues, and infrastructure is really critical, like roads, and what's the city's process of in understanding what level of activity will the city have in putting a road system in, or what does that look like? Will there be a spine road put in? Those are things that will have to be determined over time as we go through this process.
Can I back up to that? I still have this problem in my head with the expansion of residential being only 50 acres now. I just don't see how that's even realistic over a 20-year period. So we want affordable housing. We're going to allow 450 acres of industrial, but only 50 acres of residential. These houses are going to come incredibly, it's going to go up 5 times. I mean, this doesn't make any sense to me.
There's a very fine filter at the state level on housing in terms of like buildable lands and what we have to go through that process. It's very detailed and very formulaic on how you go about determining your buildable lands. And Oregon in particular has made it very, very conservative, probably in the notion of trying to prevent sprawl. I mean, just cutting to the chase. On the industrial side of things, it's not as difficult to make an argument to say this is what our needs are, and that's about as far as I can go with that. I'm not saying the number's off, but it is more conservative than other states I've worked in where the formula is different. And so I would not necessarily disagree about, I would say it's conservative in terms of, the number. We're still working through that. You as the planning commissioners will see the final number. It could range, it might be over 50 acres. We're not trying to overestimate or underestimate, but given what we know, I mean, things like, for example, in Oregon, if you have a subdivision that's been recorded and there's lots out there, that is not considered committed. So that's considered vacant. Even though until a building permit's placed on those lots, it is not considered consumed, which means that property, in our opinion, is already consumed. It's not in the formula for the state. We can't really argue that it is what it is, and that's just, it would take the legislature to change that, essentially. So it's you're right, the lens is different on residential. It is different.
It seems to me it's just going to be really hard to keep things affordable around here.
And that's, well, we've got the efficiency measures and, cottage developments, planned unit developments, those, I mean, that's the goal, is to try to, do what we can to, and to your point, land supply is not something Oregon really considers. It just doesn't consider that. And it's not like a factor. There's market factors in other states that are considered, which, and it's not considered in Oregon. So it's, that it is, I'm just letting you know it is what it is, and that we have to work within those confines.
Along with those confines, then, is there kind of a requirement to build at a particular density level within the residential land that gets designated? Is it just that they're saying we're going to keep the land at allocation low, and then you're supposed to really densely populate it?
The acreage does match up with the need. I mean, it's not like there's not, I don't think there's a disconnect between the acreage and the need. But to the point of like, if there was more land, would it be more affordable? There is a connection between, and the housing needs analysis will go through that detail with you all in that process, but that number does reflect what that anticipated growth is going to be here. It's going to depend on the zone of the property. Obviously, I think our best angle here is to provide incentives to allow different housing product types with these efficiency measures like cottage developments and planned unit developments. It's incremental in its nature, but and that's probably the best we can do. There are minimum standards in our zones. There may be new zones that we end up creating as well specifically for the urban growth boundary areas that we don't have now. That's not yet been determined, but I think that's a possibility that we could have zones that we don't have currently, which will have different densities. And I would say that's probably, that question will be covered in detail when we get into the discussions on housing needs, both in the work sessions and also before it gets to the hearing process. You're asking a really good question. I'm not trying to dodge the question, but you're asking how do those link up and how do we become affordable when we have a limited land supply? And that, there's definitely some math involved in like how much is needed, and then the other part of it is what does the city do to try to incentivize to make product types different?
Buy your house now.
Continuing on, so those were kind of covered that. So just one item on concept planning, and I was just going to cover that briefly. So again, just broad brush timeframes, like if everything else holds constant and we end up with no appeals for the urban growth boundary expansion, we would anticipate that would be around June 2025. How long would it take to do a concept plan? And that's going to depend on where that is and some other factors around that. I'm just going to throw a general number out here. That may take another year to complete beyond the urban growth boundary expansion. It could take longer than that. We haven't really actually figured that out. That's not really in the current scope of work that we're dealing with now. But I'm just wanting to also let everyone know that this is not going to happen overnight. It's a long range plan.
So concept plan would be approximately a year from the UGB approval in third quarter 25, so we'd be looking at the end of 26?
Probably summer 26, yeah, is my guess. That's just, again, that's a rough guess at this point. We'll have more details on November 1 with the city council work session, but I think I just also want to start to lay this out because I think it's important on expectations. I think everybody wants to jump to the map and they think everything's going to be annexed in a year. It's not going to happen. This is a long play here, and it's very complicated.
Do we potentially have the ability to designate some of the lands as green spaces or parks or something along the way so that we can make sure that we're not looking at walls of housing and industrial development?
Absolutely. And I think that that's another point, another element here that I think will be part of the housing needs analysis piece is that needs to come back full circle, which is the needs for parkland to be baked into that, which is not subtractive of the, if it's 50 acres, it's not subtractive of that, it's additional beyond that. So that is really important. I know there's a high desire here for things like sports fields and, park, whatever that is, whatever your recreational thing, whether it's a park that you want to, go out and just enjoy more passively or something more defined. There is a very strong desire, I think, in this community to have more of that kind of opportunity.
To piggyback on that real quick, can land be specifically designated for building indoor sports complexes? I mean, it rains here 9 months out of the year, so turning a bunch of space into soccer fields doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It's like if we could incentivize building something that would be usable year-round, is that just kind of getting too far in the weeds of designations?
I think it would be something to consider. I mean, my just on a high level, I would want to make sure we had enough, whether it was indoor or outdoor. I mean, and again, not to even, we don't even know what this looks like exactly, but I don't want us to be shorted on like, oh, he didn't plan for that. And so it has to come off of the residential, which is already perhaps like conservative.
Yeah.
I mean, it should not be coming off the residential side. So that's another discussion that's going to involve Department of Land Conservation and Development when we get into that discussion. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it's clearly important. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. Just making some notes here. These are good, really good questions, and this is why we're here, so we can come back and give more detailed answers. So hopefully by the time we get to the hearings, you guys will have everything that you need. So I think that was probably the main thing I wanted to cover there. And then again, kind of on the concept planning issue, getting into more of the environmental considerations. There's a goal, there's a need to have a wetland inventory, and that's probably the biggest thing. Not to anticipate that there's a ton of wetlands around Canby, but that's part of the process as well. In order to actually be able to annex any property, you have to have a way of showing that you have utilities and infrastructure, and then you also have done an inventory to show that you're identifying where the wetlands are. Really, the idea behind that is that that you're looking to develop according to infrastructure requirements and not looking at making major impacts to wetlands. So that's the other part of this. So continuing with the concept planning, again, back to kind of what that would mean beyond an urban growth boundary adoption, which is the phasing and funding, dealing with things like system development charges and, ways of paying for the infrastructure that's part of that area. And this, again, all sets up the basis for someone to be able to come in and say, okay, I'm in the urban growth boundary, there's a concept plan, I want to now annex the property and bring it into the city and rezone it according to the comprehensive plan. That would be how it would, the sequence is urban growth boundary expansion, conceptual plan. Somebody comes in then with a private development, they'll do an annexation and a zone change, because we'll do comprehensive plan designations, which will identify what that zoning will likely be, but we actually don't rezone it until it's brought into the city.
Wasn't the comp plan being done considerably sooner?
So this would be for the areas that are actually outside of the urban growth boundary.
So they're going to be evaluated as
Yeah,
new.
and really good points. Let me back up for one sec here, because I think this is an important distinction. So the comprehensive plan adoption, which should happen anticipated by end of December 2024, would include an adoption of that area in the city and also in the current city urban growth boundary. Those would all be part of that comprehensive plan. The urban growth boundary expansion would then continue its review, and if adopted, would need to be brought back into the overall comprehensive plan. So there'd be like another adoption of the comprehensive plan post the we only control the land that we have in the city and also in our urban growth boundary. So we would adopt the comprehensive plan that would cover those areas, and then the extra land that would be added as the expansion area would be adopted through the initiation process. And then once that happened, it would be brought back into our comprehensive plan as an amendment. Does that make sense? It's not one, it's going to be two steps and not one.
But we're still making the designations about what's going to happen with the UGB land after its adoption by the end of '24, because we're kind of sketching out what would want to happen.
We would be, you'd know what that is, but the adoption of the initial comprehensive plan would just be for within city and current urban growth boundary.
Just because it can only apply to what we
Yes,
currently
but to
control.
your point, though, the designation, we would have anticipated designations for the urban growth boundary expansion area that goes into that initiation process through the state.
Would all be still designated end of '24 with the anticipation of bringing it in.
Exactly, with
sometime in
those
25.
comprehensive plan designations, yeah. But we can't adopt that into the comp plan until it's been through the state's process
But we're going to plan for it.
in advance. It's complicated, and it's important that we do it, I think, in the sequence as well, so that we're not postponing other implementation that happens within the area the city already controls.
Okay, thank you.
So that's a very good point. So I've got a few other slides, and again, the concept plans, it's not something that state law really requires, but I think it pragmatically is something that would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to do development once an urban growth boundary was adopted without a concept plan. So we're going to go into more detailed discussion again on that in subsequent work sessions, and in particular with the council on November 1 on that issue. So just, we covered that partly already. And so this kind of brings us kind of back up to like, okay, what are the next steps? And I'm repeating myself, but I know there's a lot out there. So September 14th, Community Summit number 1, and I didn't have that date until today. November 14th is the Community Summit number 2, with a visioning and mapping exercise to begin scenario planning. October 17 is, I believe, the next Project Advisory Committee meeting. I don't have 100% confirmation on that, but it's likely, as long as we can get the Willamette room, which I'm hoping we can. November 1st, which should be the City Council work session to review kind of the overall items of the urban growth boundary expansion. Many of those we've covered tonight. And then the anticipated housing efficiency measures, that again, that work's going to continue. I'm assuming that we will have at least a work session in November on that, depending on how quickly the consultants can come back with information you guys have previously seen on cottage developments and planned unit developments.
Can we get a copy of this slide sent to us?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. So this kind of covers a lot tonight, and I just, again, try to keep all the balls kind of, synced up here so you understand what this means. Hopefully this is helpful. I think that sometimes it's like, why are all these steps involved? Part of that is it's a state-run process, and we have to go through all these, but to the point that I think just trying to be as transparent about this process as possible, I think is really important. And that's really all I had. If you guys have questions, lot to chew on, a lot more coming in the next months, and into next year.
So did I hear you earlier correctly that we jumped a little bit ahead in terms of items of interest for planning?
And I still have a few things that I can cover on that.
Okay.
So just a couple, if we'll jump right into that. We will likely have, in September, I don't know what these look like exactly, but we will likely have work sessions in the September months, and the month of September, rather. We will start getting back, we have some hearing items, and I'm hoping those will be in October. I don't have those are not quite landed yet, but there's a couple hearing items that are coming up that are in that range. And that was about it. So, and then we'll be obviously talking about a lot of the stuff that we talked about tonight on, so, getting back on housing needs analysis. I see a work session needed on that, which I think is important that we continue that dialogue as well.
Do you see any work sessions where, or are we waiting to address code issues till later in the process?
On the housing needs side of things, clearly we'll be addressing code because that's going to be the next round. And so we'll get into the meat of that and probably in the first meeting that we'll have with the consultant, with them being in a work session.
Does that include the alleyways?
What's that?
Does that include the alleyways?
Well, no.
Because
Fences and
I think we need to get back.
Well,
we need
no,
to get back to that.
I mean, that's
Like to
another.
revisit the R2 overall.
Yeah, this is more housing, but I mean, there's many items, to your point, there are many items out there. Alleyways clearly need to be addressed. That's not necessarily on our near-term list, but it's not to say it's unimportant.
Okay.
There's just a lot. I mean, things are getting to the point where we're probably scheduling this out, and as we get into the next year, I'm hoping we get as much done as we need to get done by the end of this year, because it's going to all start building next year too. It's so you'll be seeing a lot coming to the Planning Commission,
Great.
especially on housing efficiency measures and housing needs analysis. That would be my push for this year.
Okay.
That really is the goal, because although other items are important, if we kind of start losing track of the sequence, it's going to take longer in the end, and I really don't want this to take longer. I mean, the schedule is not 100% bulletproof that we have on the comprehensive plan update, but I don't want it to slip a whole lot, and so that's part of the reason we're pushing those items.
Understood. Do we have any questions or comments?
I've got a couple. Way back on slide 3, you had mentioned something about Malala had already gone through this process and that it had been beneficial to them. How has it been beneficial to them?
They are in a similar situation to us, and they're actually, as I understand it, even in a worsened situation where they weren't doing things exactly as we were, where we're doing housing needs and economic opportunity stuff exactly sequenced the same way we were. And so I think they had even a more rigorous time frame to get things completed. And I also feel like we're really pushing to, I think they were in a more desperate situation for land as well. So it just gives them that opportunity to say from the state and from the county, like, we're behind you on this. And I think that by itself is a value added in that process. Those two entities, the county and the state, have significant authority over these items. And so the idea behind this is you go to the county. I mean, it would be odd, I would think, that the county would adopt a sequential plan and then come back and say we have huge heartburn later during an urban growth boundary expansion, because they would be aware of it. So just by that discussion alone, there have been jurisdictions that I'm aware of that did not coordinate. Cities did not coordinate with the county and went through a fairly elaborate process, and in the end, the county denied the expansion.
So we've seen the steps that they've taken, so we're able to learn from that to see what's been successful.
Exactly. We actually
Gotcha.
used their template that they've been great. I mean, a lot of the cities share with each other, and it's a great thing. And because they have similar challenges that we do, but they're different. They're different challenges. But they're facing a lot of the same things. And so they're trying to have predictability, and I think their sequence was slightly different. I think they were also trying to get grant money, and I don't understand all the nuances, but it was even more intense in terms of like them having to get things done exactly within a certain time frame. They have actually less time they've given themselves less time to do this than we have in our end, which I think ours is fairly aggressive. Yeah.
On slide 2, item 2, I didn't catch all of that initially, and it might make sense now that we've gone through so many other things, but there we go.
So which of those would you like me to cover?
I think it was,
Slide 2?
I thought it was slide 2,
I'm sorry, Pat.
but I mean, that's pretty straightforward, so let's look at 3 real quick. I had a screen covering what slide was what early on. Would you mind putting it on 3, please, Laney?
3, Kim?
Maybe I was off. Let's see. Nope. Would you mind moving for one more? And I'll
Yep.
just double check that I'm not. Okay, it was, I think it might have been slide 4 here. So this is. No, you explained the sequential review process through the rest of this, so I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. I appreciate your input tonight. That's really all I have. And it's great. This is really helpful for me. I'm hoping this is helpful for you because it's very helpful for me to go through this exercise and talk through this because when you all bring that forward to us, it's because I don't really know what you guys are going to say. And that's really helpful to get that input.
Looks like we're waiting to say a lot at later phases,
Yeah.
right? And that's the other thing too, is learning when we're going to have some input. I think it's like, okay,
Yeah.
we keep, we're preparing. Just keep preparing, which is good. I don't have anything else unless anybody else has anything else. Planning director update. I think we've covered that already. So.
I think we're good, and I would really encourage you all to be involved in the community summits as they come up. That's really important. I know you've all been kind of ambassadors as well in your own circles, and I really appreciate that. Really, really important that the conversation continues, and even if it's a matter of saying, hey, by the way, here's a survey you can take online for the comprehensive plan. You don't even need to have a full-on conversation with someone, but just steering people to this is really, really important. It's important to continue the conversation. I think there's been a significant effort to reach out. We sent the mailer out and the sewer bills, 4,400 residents. And there'll be other things that we do as well. But your individual, when you're at the store talking to somebody, like if you talk to 3 people every time you went to the store, that would be significant. So like over the time, I don't know what the number is, but it's like, I think it's just important that people they're aware of this, and this is Canby, it's Canby's community, it's Canby's future, and I think it's important that people input into that process. So just continue doing what you're doing, and if you could be thinking about that as you're out and about, I think that's important for people to be aware, hey, I did have a chance and I did input, and then because that's going to all get consolidated into information that's going to be helpful for us as this vision continues forward into the comp plan.
And just so we are clear on those dates, the September 14th, you're laying out a vision, but is there a Q&A for citizens to participate in that first one? I thought you mentioned the second one's like a workshop a little bit.
There is. I think there'll be, I don't have the format on September 14. There's going to be information, absolutely a way to have a conversation. I'm not sure if we're going to have a full-on presentation or what that exactly looks like, but yes, if people show up, there'll be the ability to talk to people and get answers to things. It's the very beginning of this process. As we do get into the November 14, when we get into November 14, there'll be more opportunity and it'll be more tangible. This is more high level on the 14th, but I still want people to attend that. I think it's critical that they understand the foundation of this and what we're doing. And we absolutely will give people answers to what their questions are.
Okay.
May I? While it's not an official channel, if somebody took it on to post something to Canby Now on Facebook, do something a week or two in advance, do a reminder a day or two in advance, and a reminder the day of, I think that's probably one of the best ways to reach a large contingency of the Canby population in one fell swoop.
Is Jimmy on there?
Not lots of people follow the city.
What's that?
Lots of people pay attention to that.
Is Jamie Stickle on there?
We do our Facebook update. I don't,
But I think that's the official city channel
Okay.
as opposed to.
Canby
the
now.
Canby
Okay,
now.
well, let me
I mean,
ask-
that's where people be grumping about when Taco Bell was closed for a really long time, or the train, or whatever. But there's a lot of community engagement there, for better or worse.
I'll check with Canby, great point, or Jamie on that. I'll check with her on that.
Okay.
Okay. Unless there's anything else, I'll entertain a motion for adjournment. Do we have a motion?
I move that we adjourn the meeting.
Do we have a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All against? No one. Thank you very much, Canby. That'll conclude our